believe that leadership isn't a position or a role, it's an action and a choice. I believe that leadership can be learned. I believe that great leaders emerge from adversity. I believe that Happy Valley is full of great leaders. These are their stories. Welcome to episode number 1 of the Penn State Leaders Podcast. My name is David Ginhart, and today we have with us Don Welch, who's Penn State's Chief Information Officer. Welcome, Don. Excited to have you on this inaugural podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. This is a great opportunity.
Well, we know you're a busy person. We appreciate your time. I'm going to jump right into the questions and an opportunity for folks to get to know you a little bit. Tell me how you came to Penn State.
Okay, I was the Chief Information Security Officer at the University of Michigan and was looking for some other opportunities. And they were a pretty diverse set of opportunities, to include heading a cybersecurity research center, being a chief information officer, et cetera. But Penn State was one of them. And as I was narrowing down my choices, initially I thought Penn State would be my last choice, to basically do the same job again, being a CISO. But once I got to know Nick and David and how serious they were about it, and who they were as leaders, I thought this would be a really good place for me to come and make a big impact. So ended up here at Penn State, and clearly I think that was that was a good decision. You never know when you make a decision how things are going to turn out, but I think I've had a great time here, and I think I've been able to make an impact on security and on IT.
Yeah, that's and just to clarify for folks who maybe aren't real familiar with Penn State. So Nick Jones is our provost, and David Gray, who just recently retired, was the senior vice president for finance and business. And I actually got an opportunity to meet you during your interview process. And, one of the things that I was excited about was seeing your background and all the things that you had done, all the places you had worked, both within the Army, as a CEO of a company, working within higher education. It was something I really looked forward to see you and your leadership and what you were going to bring to Penn State, and not just in information security, but just as a leader in working in so many different environments, and what you would bring to the leadership table at Penn State. So, and you have made quite an impact now as the Chief Information Officer. Kind of thinking about your leadership journey, what person or people influenced you the most to become the leader that you are today?
So I thought about this question, and it's really hard to identify one person that has influenced me the most. Of course, this is one of the things that happens when you're old. You have a lot of experiences, and a lot of people have helped shape me. So I'll take your question and do the politician answer the question I want to answer, as opposed to the one you asked. So when looking for influences throughout my life, obviously you look to people that you work for, that you admire, and you think that that this is someone that I want to be like. And I've had plenty of those. And I've also worked for some people where I have said, I am never going to be that person. And I think that's also a really great way to learn. We learn the most from mistakes. Well, it's really nice if you can learn from somebody else's mistakes and not inflict them on your team. So I've worked for a number of leaders that have, in many ways, had a stronger influence on me than even the good examples, where I have never wanted to be like that kind of person. But I think something that we don't normally look at is people that work for us, and look to them for examples. There's been a number of times that I've had someone on my team, and I've really admired them. So that person, really is a great leader. This was, a great way they handled this situation. this is something that I need to do more of, or, need to do if I get in a similar situation. So I would look at, everybody around you. And as you're going through your day-to-day activities, try and take note of people that you either want to emulate or that you don't want to emulate. And one of the things that I think is really helpful, it's one thing to make a mental note, and sometimes they stick with you and sometimes they don't. But a really useful tool is the idea of journaling. When I have led leadership classes and have coached people, I've advised them to focus on try to journal at least one time a day. And so at the end of the day, write down what you did well, what you'd like to do better at, maybe what you note from somebody else. As you get more senior, try and once a week, if you're wrapping things up on Friday or something like that. But the act of writing it down carves a different path in your brain. So, our brains have memories, and they're, neural paths in our brains. If we say something, if we think something, if we write something, they're all a little different. If we explain it to someone, once again, a different path. So all those different ways of expressing the same idea increase the probability that it'll stick with you. Then if you actually do it and do it again and again, then it becomes a behavior. But back to the original question, I think it's really important to observe all people around you, and don't discount junior people. They sometimes can teach some really good lessons. I've been very fortunate to have some great people work for me that have helped shape my career.
Don, I love so much about your answer just there. So this idea of journaling, I've seen people say that, or heard people say that if the only way you're going to achieve a goal is you have to write it down, right? Mm-hmm. That increases the chances of you achieving that goal. I had never thought about the backside of that, which is using journaling as a way to learn from your experiences. So not the goal setting up front, but now reflecting back. I love that. And the other thing I really liked about your answer of learning from all sorts of people as leaders, not just necessarily looking up, but looking across, and as you said, even down. One of the themes of this podcast is that anyone can be a leader. And I think that just your answer really reflects that. So love that. Thank you. Another theme of the podcast is that leaders often emerge from adversity. So can you remember a time in your career that you faced adversity, and how did that impact how you lead today?
Yeah, so going way back, when I was a cadet at West Point, during your second summer or your third summer there, usually cadets had an opportunity to go out and sample the Army, and it was usually a really great time. You got a chance to be a platoon leader for a month, and it was a really rewarding time. A small group of cadets got to go to the Army's Ranger School, which is a pretty challenging course, and it was very competitive for cadets to get into that program. It was not something that I thought that I could do or that I even wanted to do. And my company officer at the time gave me no choice. And even though I hadn't applied for it or competed for it, he sent me there. And the idea behind Ranger School is that the Army wants to put you under stress as a leader. They can't shoot at you in peacetime, but they want to do everything else they can to make it stressful. So they don't feed you, they don't let you sleep, and they're constantly evaluating and grading you. And almost everybody gets pushed to the point where they mentally quit. Everyone gets sick or injured to some point. And there's plenty of opportunities where you could opt out of the course. The graduation rate at the time I went ranged from 20 to 30%. And and so you had a lot of opportunities to quit, and and some people, would take them. A lot of people wouldn't quit, but just would not pass and all the various tasks and tests and evaluations that you went through. But you learned your limits. And I think that as a leader, this was something that was really important. And in fact, after I graduated from West Point, I always liked to do something at least once a year that would push me to the point where mentally I would quit. So I took up running marathons. I was an offensive tackle in college, so not exactly something that moved, that just fit right in there. But I can absolutely guarantee you that, for I think my first 5 or 6 marathons, there was a point where I started walking, just mentally. That was it. I also did a number of long triathlons, but the idea was I wanted to know myself well enough where I would know when I was at my limit. And as a leader, you want to push yourself as far as you can, but if you go past that limit, you're going to let your team down. And they're depending on you. Now, of course, in the military, it could be a life and death circumstance, but at Penn State, we've just come through a pandemic. And as a leader, being positive helps keep your people up. Some of them are facing some very difficult times. You can't show that that you're struggling too. So you've got to not be past your limit, but of course you want to push as hard as you can, and you want to get as much done, and you want to help the organization as much as you can. So I think this idea of adversity, knowing yourself and knowing what that true limit is. And I think the one thing that we all find out when we're tested is that we can do a heck of a lot more than we thought we could. If many things I've done in my life, if I have at the beginning, if I thought about what it would take and I knew what it would take to get to the end, I would never have started. And there's been a number of opportunities in my life where I have taken the risk and gone on to try something, to do something. I wasn't a real stellar student as an undergraduate, but I ended up getting a PhD in computer science. And because the Army was sending me, I just had 3 years. So not only was I going to compete with people that were a lot smarter than me, but I had to do it in a short period of time. And people think I'm just being self-deprecating, but there is no doubt that I'm the stupidest person to ever get a PhD from the University of Maryland. But PhD is not just raw intelligence. You have to have enough, but especially in my case, you really had to have the discipline to push and to know what your limits are. Taking on a new job, I went to be the CEO of a company that had just gone through large retrenchment, laid off half its staff. The board didn't think that there was much value there, but they thought they'd give it one more try, and they hired me to revive it. And I'd never been a CEO. So I moved my family up from Texas to Michigan. And I didn't know how I was going to succeed, but I had faith in myself because I knew that I wouldn't quit. So I think that ability to kind of know your limits, push yourself up to the limit and not over it, is a key aspect of self-knowledge for us, for leaders, to be able to be successful. So anyways, that's my adversity situation. I'm now too old and feeble to do things like push myself in marathons or triathlons and so forth, and I just try and stay fit. But I do like challenges, and We certainly have a lot of them here at Penn State, but fortunately, most of them are not life and death.
I want to point out, I think you may be actually the only offensive lineman to have run a marathon. I'm guessing.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but not saying I was a good offensive lineman. I was on the small side, but I definitely wasn't a good marathoner because I was on the big side.
But I think your concept of pushing yourself beyond, it's one of the things that I really enjoy about sports, especially endurance sports, is learning where those limits are and pushing. And we really saw this last year in this pandemic. We did a lot of things this past year very quickly in IT that we didn't think that we could ever do. Things that we would never do or would take a really long time. We found out in the right environment, right circumstances, the right pressure, we actually can get a lot done, a lot faster and a lot better than we ever thought. So yeah, that really resonated with me. So Don, leadership is really a lifetime journey. As you've talked about how you've started your leadership career, within the Army and how it's evolved. Is there anything that you do to study leadership? Are there books or authors or podcasts that you listen to or that you would recommend specifically around leadership, or other things that you do or listen to that you think help you become a better leader?
So I like to read, and I have read a lot of books on leadership. And especially when I come into a new situation, I'll read a lot of books around that specific situation. Like when I came into the position here at Penn State, Michael Cubitt had just left, and so there are a number of books of how to take into move into a leadership role in an organization when the leader has left under not the best circumstances, and what is required. So even though there may be some positive feelings about the team, it still can be a challenge because change is unsettling. As we're facing now, we're going to do a little reorganization that really shouldn't be threatening to people, but it is because it's change and understanding that. So the most, I think if I was going to pick one book to recommend to people, it would be a book called Primal Leadership. Daniel Goleman is one of the lead authors in the book, and a year, maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, he had a really popular video that came out and talked about motivation and drive in people. And maybe you saw it was one of the first ones where they did all the whiteboarding stuff. But anyways, this book on primal leadership really taught me a lot about emotional intelligence. And if there is one thing that a leader needs more than anything else, I think it is emotional intelligence. As a leader, you do not need to be the smartest person. You do not need to have the best ideas, but you need to be able to influence your people so that and create the environment where the best ideas will come out and you can execute those ideas. You need to be able to develop your team. One of my kind of snarky quips is, as a leader, if you are the best leader, you just sit in your office all day and do nothing, because you have developed your team to the point where they need almost nothing to execute the team's mission. So spending time developing your team, having a team that is self-motivated, that understands the bigger picture, that can easily understand their priorities, that will take the initiative, that enjoys accomplishing things, and is always looking for ways to innovate and do things better. That that requires emotional intelligence, understanding people, understanding them, understanding how to influence them, understanding what their needs are, both as individuals and as members of a group. So that book was really good. It of course tells you a lot about it, but it just to me really reinforced the importance of it. For those who know me, I tend to have kind of a sarcastic sense of humor, and for a long time I thought, yeah, this is just this is a defect that I have to work with. I have to try and keep my mouth shut and not let that sense of humor come out. And the book told me that no, a sense of humor is really good in a leader. I was like, oh, good. I thought I was just a jerk. Now I'm a good leader. So anyways, that was one that really resonated with me. There might be some more modern books, but I haven't found one that is better than that. And it's one that I would recommend. And it's so old, it's probably pretty cheap on Kindle or on Amazon now.
That's great. Primal Leadership. You said Daniel Goldberg?
Goldman, M-A-N.
Goldman. Okay,
Yeah.
it's on my list now.
There it is.
Oh, there it is.
Let's see.
Excellent.
It's interesting how, okay, the camera tries to pick out a face, but doesn't show the book very well.
So Don, just in kind of wrapping up, if someone wants to learn more about you, do you have any web or social media presence, or if
so especially having spent a lot of time in security and teaching information operations and so forth, I don't think there's any good that comes from social media. I will read it a little bit, but you won't see much. I posted some things on LinkedIn. I posted a series of essays on cybersecurity strategy and so forth. So LinkedIn is my biggest presence. I got off Facebook years ago. I'm not on Twitter or Instagram or any of those kinds of things where I think the only thing that can happen is you can get yourself in trouble. I was listening to a podcast, in fact, yesterday, and the author, the person who was being interviewed, had this, and I'll probably get the wording wrong, but the idea that to be a rational, good person is you want to have say a small sense of self, and my wording is not quite right, but it's this idea, if you really identify, I am this, then as new ideas come in, you are not necessarily looking to evaluate those ideas. You are looking to reinforce your position of what you think you are. Is that idea attacking me, or is it an idea that reinforces it? And obviously, if we have a strong sense of self. So this was being talked about in a political sense, but also in a sense like if you're a scientist or what you believe. I'm part of the tribe that believes that global warming is caused by humans, and you filter your evidence that way. Or I'm part of the tribe that thinks that vaccines are bad, and you'll filter to those evidence. And that if you want to be a better rational person, you're not so invested in how you label me. What am I? What do I think I am? Although you have to have a sense of self to be a leader. But in terms of what you believe, I think being open to information and changing your mind as the evidence comes in, I think is important. So anyways, a long way to answer that. I really don't think it's useful for me to put out in social media what I think I am, because it reinforces it to me, let alone what it does to other people. But I'd rather absorb the information. There's certain things, obviously, I try to convince people professionally, about us being invested in Penn State and the kinds of things that we want to do there at Penn State that, I do on my weekly emails and so forth. But beyond that, I'm really not that involved. And I'm not saying it's bad for everybody, but just for myself, I opted away from that years ago when social media was first coming out. My communications director, when I was the CEO of a company, said, "You have to have a presence, and we got to do these things, and this is what people want." And so, yeah, I did it for a while, and I would, take things from networking, and most of the stuff she came up with anyways, but it was all technical, kinds of things or things that we were doing as a company. But yeah, not big on. And then if you want to get to know me, let's talk. That I think is a lot better than trying to get to know me through a social presence.
Well, I think people have hopefully gotten to know you a little bit today from our conversation. So we appreciate your time. This, if you don't have a big social media presence, this might be one of the few ways that people could get to know you remotely without having a relationship with you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Penn State Leaders podcast. Thank you for your service to Penn State and for your time today.
Oh, thanks, Dave. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. As you know, I heap a lot of work on you that you take on with a smile. And the fact that you're taking this on voluntarily, I think it's something that's great that will hopefully help us across the university to be a better IT organization, to better serve the university. And I really thank you for volunteering to take this on. I think it's a great idea.
Oh, absolutely. I think Penn State's, like I say in the intro, Penn State's full of great leaders, and I think people are interested to learn more about them and hear their stories. And so we definitely appreciate you doing that with us today.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Don. I think what I'd like to do is ask you I have your leadership philosophy, which is something that you sent out as soon as you took the new role as Chief Information Officer, which first time I had ever seen that, and I thought was tremendously effective in helping very quickly for people to get to know who you were as you were kind of thrust into this leadership role over an organization of 500 people. And so I was kind of reading through it and highlighting. So I'd like to ask you some questions about some things
Sure.
that are in your leadership philosophy. I thought very early in your document, it talks about this idea of no excuses, which I know came from your experience in the Army.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think about a question related to, leadership in the Army versus leadership at a private company like Merit Networks versus leadership at a public higher education. How do you see those environments as different? Does your leadership have to change in those different environments, or is it mostly the same? Kind of, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah. So when I was actually interviewing to be the CEO of Merit Network, I had somebody ask me that this was just a few years after I retired. And the question was something along the lines of, well, leadership in the Army is easy. You just tell them what to do and you have a gun. And I said, yeah, but remember, they have guns too, and there's more of them. And so I think leadership really is the same in all those environments. So in the military, yes, you theoretically have some authority, but nobody ever really gets anything done with authority. You might get compliance at some point, but in the military, we're talking about a life or death situation, and people aren't going to put their life and limb on the line unless they trust you. And in higher ed, it's not a life or death situation, but you've got lots of individuals who are very smart and have lots of different goals and sometimes conflicting goals that they're trying to manage. And once again, the core is trust. And that if somebody doesn't do what I say, the consequences are not, they're not going to be thrown in the brig. They're not going to have KP duty, so forth. But so people choose whether to follow me or not, just like people choose whether to follow me or not when I'm in the infantry or at a private company, which you still have all your HR protections and so forth. So I think the core is trust. If people trust that you are trying your best and have the best interests of the organization and the individual at heart, then they will do anything for you. They will accomplish some really great things. And that was my experience in infantry units. It was my experience in special operations units, my experience in higher education and office environments. And, it's my experience here that people have to trust. And when they don't trust, then you can't get anything done. So I'm more of a proponent that it is that leadership is a constant. But I will also say that leadership has to fit your personality. So there isn't one size fits all of what successful leadership is. Successful leadership is a combination of you and the people that you're leading. And as your point is, you can lead from anywhere. We've all seen teams where someone is not the formal team leader, but they're the person that everybody looks to. They're the person that everybody trusts there. And sometimes it's the formal team leader, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it changes on the situation. And usually it's the person who's assigned as the leader, but in certain circumstances, it's another person that we turn to. So, just a story. I had this lesson. I was the company commander of the brigade headquarters company. So you had 7,000 young, infantrymen. They were, all men, young men, came from a lot of, different backgrounds, but generally thought of themselves as being more masculine, more macho. And my company had, because we were at the brigade headquarters and a bit more in the rear, we were the only company that had women in it. And at the time, there weren't a lot of women officers in the Army. So I had a platoon leader come in for our chemical platoon. And most women officers tried to be more masculine, so they would fit in, and they would try to be more what they saw other leaders be. And generally, it was fairly unsuccessful. And this young woman came in, and she was herself. If you think of someone with a bubbly, cheerleader-ish kind of personality, I don't remember, it was a long time ago, but I think she may have even brought a teddy bear to the field. And just the exact opposite of what you would expect. And she was the best platoon leader that I had, because she led from who she was, and she was genuine. And she's a great example of someone that I learned from, even though she was junior to me. But still, she was not afraid to be who she was. She led from that, and her soldiers understood that she was leading from who she was, and they trusted her, and therefore she was a great leader.
Wow, great story. That actually is also a great segue to something I wanted to hit on, which is you talked about in your leadership philosophy, a leadership being responsible for everything that their team does, including their failures. And especially, you have this quote about look out the window when assigning credit and in the mirror when assigning blame. And so it speaks to me, this idea, and I think you hit on it in our earlier conversation about making yourself smaller, right? This idea of humility, right? As a really key kind of virtue in a leader. And so I saw that in your philosophy and your answer. Can you talk a little bit about that? About, do you see virtue as as key, or excuse me, humility as key for a leader, and if so, why? Or are there other things that maybe are more important?
So I think it's a really important factor. So very few of us are as good as we think we are. And, nothing can be more annoying than someone who is obviously has a much higher opinion of themselves than you do. But I would talk about the dichotomy of being being in a leader position. And I talk to new leaders a lot this way. You have to show confidence. People want a leader who is confident enough that they trust them, that they're going to take them somewhere, and you'll go somewhere. But deep down inside, you have to know that you're a fraud and you have no business in this role, and all these people trusting you, because with that deep inner knowledge, then you, one, are open to learn. Two, you are open to feedback, and three, you're open to other ideas. And if you are too in love with your own ideas, then you're not really listening to others. You're probably more defensive when you get feedback. So we all grow, and the way we grow is with feedback. And generally speaking, we don't grow from positive feedback. We grow from negative feedback. So when somebody feels strongly enough to give you some negative feedback, especially if it's subordinate, you really have to listen and take it to heart and realize this is the tip of the iceberg, that you really need to fix things. And so I think that humility is an important part. In life, we all know people. If you think you're perfect and you've got nowhere, you just can't get any better, boy, you're cruising for a fall. There's no doubt about it.
Right. You haven't created the environment around you for people to tell you that you're not. And so, and that would seem also a challenge as a leader, as you've risen through the ranks of leadership. The number of people around you that are willing to give you that feedback is probably gets smaller and smaller over time, right? And so, how do you do that as a leader, and how have you been able to create those channels to get that feedback despite you rising in the ranks?
So so I think the actual term for it is called CEO's disease, and it's the idea that the more senior you are in the organization, the less well you understand the whole organization. So this is something that as a senior leader, you have to try and fight. So I think the most important thing is you really have to listen and understand, as I said, when you get any amount of information or feedback, that you realize that there's a lot more behind it. So just brushing off one comment, because that's the only comment I've gotten on this issue, think about it, investigate it, look at it. The other is, we all say, oh, we have an open door policy and so forth, but we, most people are very reluctant to raise an issue, especially an individual contributor in Penn State IT. There are many layers below me, and I would love to hear from them, but they don't believe it. So one of the things that I do is the Ask Me Anything sessions. So I get there with just a bunch of individual contributors in the room, and they can ask me questions. Sometimes I'll get some, good straightforward feedback, because they figure I can't really do anything to them, and they'll go ahead and let me have it, which is good. But a lot of times it's the subtlety of listening to their question. And, if I'm in a room, looking at their body language and their facial expression, or on Zoom, trying to read their facial expression. But the more senior you go, the more you have to look at clues and evidence to try and understand what's really going on. So any chance that I had to talk to an individual, see how they're going, certainly when, I ask for feedback and everybody gives me one, I get questions for the all staff, or occasionally I'll get an email to me on some question. And one of the things I always try to do too, when someone emails me, even if they're not asking a question or anything, just acknowledge it. Let them know that I read it. Let them know that there is a channel to me. One of my top priorities is if I get an email from an individual contributor that I respond to it as quickly as possible, because I want them to know that I'm listening and I'll pay attention. I may not be able to do what they ask, or may not be able to act on it, but it's important to me to help understand the whole organization.
Yeah, that's great. It actually, and it's a great, again, segue to another question I had at your leadership philosophy. You talked about knowing that you care about the people under you as a person.
Mhm.
As you think about an organization of hundreds of people, potentially thousands of people, when you were in the Army, how do you do that, right? So you talked a little bit about when you're able to have an interaction, how you kind of prioritize that, but you're not necessarily going to be able to have an interaction with, let's just talk about in your current role of 500 people, or if you think about all the IT people at Penn State, it's more like 1,500. So how do you give them a sense that you do care about them as a person when you won't always have that direct interaction with them?
Yeah, so it's really hard, but one of the things that you try to depend on is word of mouth. So when you have the opportunity to interact with any individual contributor, taking it seriously, making sure they understand that you care about them and care about their problem is good, and word will eventually spread. So this is a story of that probably doesn't put me in too good of a light, but when I was a lieutenant, I was single, and being in my like 23 or something like that, we're downtown at the bars doing what 23-year-olds do, and so had a lot to drink, but ran into one of my soldiers, and that soldier had a lot to drink, and so felt the courage to tell me about a problem that they had. Through my enjoyment of the night, I worked really hard to remember and then deal with it the next day. And I think the soldier, they were drunk. They knew I'd been drinking, probably didn't expect much to come of it if they even remembered it the next morning. But the fact that I got his problem solved, I think, it is one of those things that it was important to me to solve his problem, no matter how it was brought to my attention. And I think that helped build trust, because, they talk to their friends, and just like if, you blow someone off, that word's going to spread. When you take care of someone, that's going to spread too. And you don't just do this, I think, because you think it's the right thing to do. I think you do it because you really care about the person. You want to solve their problem. Somebody shouldn't. It's one thing when you're talking about soldiers that are away from home or whatever, but it's the same kind of thing here. We all have family conflicts and issues, and especially during the pandemic. If there's some way that we as a leader can make someone's life better, that to me is really rewarding. We talk about what's our purpose in life, and if when I leave this world, if I have made things a little better in the world and for people, that's great. And leadership provides a good avenue to do that. You can you have a lot of opportunities where you can help someone with their work-life balance, help them work through a personal problem by cutting them slack at work, or get rid of this annoyance or anything it is, just to make their life just a little bit better. I think if we all have that purpose in life, then the world's a great place.
Well, I can't think of a better way to wrap the podcast on making the world a better place. So hopefully in our short conversation here, we've given some people some insight into leadership, and they can go forth and make the world a better place in their leadership. So again, Don Welch, thank you for your time and for your leadership at Penn State.
Hey, thanks, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Happy Valley Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. Give us a review and share us with others. You can follow us on Twitter at HV Leader Podcast and on YouTube at Happy Valley Leaders Podcast. Remember, leadership is an action and a choice, so go be a leader.